All right, everyone, we start off today with pointing out something that, it should be self-evident, it should be obvious, and by the way, to people who disagree, you'd call me problematic if I endorsed the concept of war because I'd be a fucking hypocrite. I've been anti every other war that's happened since I was a little kid. The invasion of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, hell, even when Trump bombed the Syria air base and nobody even responded, even that as an act of war I opposed on principle, even if it was pragmatic at the time. One of the interesting sides to that, there were Russian mercs that died in that bombing. Russia didn't do anything, thus showing that Putin a little bit more restrained when there's not a vegetable in chief heading the de facto head of NATO, namely Joe Biden, Joe Tato. But the excuses that I see made for the invading of Ukraine, I'd like to pick them apart because none of them really make sense. I think the big thing is the false dichotomy pitch. So well, if you don't support Russia, you support globalism. Because there are globalists that support Ukraine. That's a false dichotomy, and you're really kind of extending the connections there. Yes, there are going to be people who call it out, and Elon Musk the other day pointed this out with his NPC meme. You should ridicule people who simply slap the Ukrainian flag on their Twitter and act as though it was a pro-vax message or something like that, just because it's hip to support Ukraine. CNN told them so, fucking Biden told them so, and so they just do it mindlessly. If, though, it is out of principle, which in my case it is, ideological principle, I'm against the concept of invading your neighboring state, regardless of what excuses you make, I would be a hypocrite if I were to support that move. And I'd like to point out that most of the excuses that are given, not well at this point, not by Russia so much as by people in the West that happen to support Russia, are bullshit. I'm not taken in by the Putin strong bullshit either. That meme kind of died 10 years ago, actually. Yes, I remember it was quite funny. Oh, here's Putin riding a bear, and Putin, the transmogrified to be 7 feet tall or whatever, even though I think he's 5'8", actually. Sort of on Macron's level. I'm not taken in by that. Some people have this mythological belief that Russia stands against globalism as well. That's a big one to address because Russia is tied at the hip with China through BRICS and with other states. You'll notice India and so forth. Is that not a form of globalism? Various trade and military agreements with China as the main financer of projects in other countries. The only difference is that Russia is the front-end military machine as opposed to China, which is the piggy bank. Well, they're still part of globalism. Hell, China's one of the main linchpins of globalism. It's one of the biggest, it's the second largest economy. It's one of the biggest exporting muscles in human history per capita. Chinese goods were a big thing back in the days of the original Silk Road too, but now it's like, half of the shit you buy in the US is from China. Does that materialistic globalism not in part therefore involve their complicity? There's no sense of any larger nationalist rhetoric in China other than them safeguarding their own fucking economy and the ability of their one-party warped system to continue governing. Russia is one of their big partners and allies, diplomatically, militarily, to an extent, certainly within trade. At this point, without selling fuel to the U.S. and much of it to Europe, I think China is now by far the biggest buyer of Russian oil and gas, actually. Denazification is another excuse that we've been given. I see people, it's weird, I see people named Ulfric Stormhammer who are ranting about how Ukraine needed to be invaded because there are Nazis, like the Azov battalion. Look at the fucking things that you've been peddling for the last 10 years. And you're talking about Stormfront and shit, but you have a problem with them. Why? Because they're Nazis that use their guns? No, I'm an ideological Nazi. I don't actually want to fire the first shot in the World War. I'm sure I'd be in a bunker operating a radio or something. The Azov battalion, they're bad dudes. Okay, that brings us to another point that's very pertinent. And this is, I think, the most common one. Zelensky is corrupt and the Ukrainians bombed things in eastern Ukraine. Absolutely. Does this justify an invasion by a foreign state? Bullshit. That's exactly the same concept as when the U.S. went in to curb stomp the Iraqis with Desert Storm, leading directly to the reinvasion of Iraq later, which was on trumped-up pretenses, pardon the pun, with regards to 9/11 that Saddam never had anything to do with. It's the same kind of world policing mentality. It's even the same nation-building mentality. It's also probably equally doomed. The only advantage Russia has in Ukraine that the United States didn't have, along with its coalition of the willing in Iraq, is proximity. That is a land border. As we see, it's not working quite so well for Russia. What about NATO expansionism? I hear a lot about that too. Who gives a fucking shit? Unless you feel NATO is a threat because you feel, hey, I'm being hostile towards them, or I want to attack them or something, you wouldn't give a shit if Ukraine joins. It's not a major military power. Well, it wasn't until we gave them 1 million Stinger missiles and anti-ship systems and shit, I suppose. And now they're a major military power. By the way, that could backfire on the United States if Russia does end up winning, just like it did in Afghanistan. Although if they lose, well, you've still got all those armaments that you gave them. Well, wonderful. You just created a first world military power on Russia's doorstep, and you're still slow-walking the concept of NATO admission. That could be a little bit of a problem in the future, just saying. This is the other point. The false dichotomy thing also fits in when they're like, well, if you're... It's like Bush with, if you're not with us, you're against us. Okay, if you don't support Putin, then that means you suck NATO's cock. That means it means you like Biden, Sticks. Oh, you're being crazy. You're a sellout. No, I'm just not being a hypocrite. I'm against war. I don't think that Ukraine should be invaded. There would be no arms buildup or problem there if it hadn't happened. I don't give a shit if NATO expands. I don't care. By the way, I wouldn't care equally if Ukraine had gone off into the Eastern Bloc and said, hey, we want a military relationship with Russia. We even want to host nuke platforms. I don't care if the Russians do that. It's like, and you've got a new McCarthyism right now where people are compelled, mostly by lemmings who have nothing to gain from this, who have just been convinced by fucking CNN or by someone else that they have to pick some strong-arm side. You are either for NATO or you're basically Putin. You either love Putin and want to suck him off and lick his bald head, or it means that you're a Biden fan or something. We got the morons on The View right now talking about how Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson are traitors and the DOJ should investigate them. They're obviously Russian assets. Why? For generally opposing war? You sound like Bush. You sound exactly like the W so-called conservatives back after 9/11 calling for bloodlust and war. Whether you're pro-Ukraine and you're like, I hate all Russians, or you're pro-Putin and you're laughing right now at dead Ukrainian pictures, I think you're all fucking nuts myself, especially when it involves a nuclear power. As far as Zelensky being corrupt, and NATO leaders by that same token, of course they are. Name a world leader who's not corrupt. Okay, so Zelensky's a bad dude, therefore Putin good? Sounds an awful lot like, hey, Putin bad dude, therefore Zelensky I'm willing to point out the obvious truth, which is that yes, Zelensky is a tin horn. Marginally better than Putin at best. He has shuttered press sites for being critical. He's shut down enemy political campaigns. He's no friend of human rights in general. That doesn't mean that he's not the elected leader of a nation that's currently under invasion. And if anything is going to, by the way, consolidate power behind Zelensky, who you hate so much, it's the Russians moving in. Wasn't a problem before. In fact, Zelensky had problems with multiple U.S. administrations, including the burgeoning Biden admin, over his treatment of prisoners and things of that nature. He had his own problems. Putin has effectively erased Zelensky's problems for the next decade or so, assuming the Russians don't win. And again, they haven't taken Kiev so far, so we'll see what happens, I suppose. What about the sovereignty of breakaway provinces argument? Okay. So a couple of provinces in eastern Ukraine want to break away. Number one, why are you shelling random homes in the western Ukrainian side? By the way, practically inviting NATO to option sending troops in to act as human shields, effectively, which is a terrible idea, and Russia's nuts for antagonizing a situation where that's even a possibility. Same with the fucking no-fly zone bullshit, which I oppose, by the way, and I'm surprised that so many Americans support such a dangerous and risky potential maneuver. Do they even know what a no-fly zone entails? Or are they mistaking Russia for Libya? Also, are they forgetting what happened to Libya after our no-fly zone there? Yeah, their lives really improved. Yeah, let's fuck everything to hell, invite a nuclear war. It'll just be a little one. Limited nuclear war's okay. The Russians have a lot of little nukes. Maybe they'll use a couple of them. It won't destroy the world. They'll just fry a million people. Oh, that sounds way better. Yeah, let's start off the new Cold War in a really hot way with some thermonuclear clouds rising up into the atmosphere and irradiating the world and marginally raising cancer rates in the northern hemisphere slightly. That sounds so great. As far as the sovereignty argument, those same people are saying that Ukraine's not a real state, correct? Well, then how are these fucking provinces real states? They're not recognized by anyone other than some of their population and by Putin. And I think the Chinese at this point. What are you talking about? You invade another country in order to carve off a piece to justify the sovereignty of breakaway provinces. So, in other words, if the French were to march into Spain right now and say you need to let Catalonia go, and then they were to go burn Madrid to the ground, would you support that? Well, there's a big Catalonian independence movement. Look, there's a Corsican movement in France. The Spanish would have to invade them then and demand they get rid of Corsica. They want independence. You'd have to invade the U.S. and carve it off into a million smaller balkans. You wouldn't even have 50 states. Some of them would get carved apart further. The world would regress to a weird form of city-state tribalism that can't even exist in the nuclear era. You're talking about going backwards in time to a much more brutish condition, by the way. Globalism has a million problems. The current NATO Western order doesn't work. The Eastern Bloc authoritarian order doesn't work. Nothing that humanity is doing right now works particularly well. But it's better than that old way, especially with new weapons involved. Yeah, no. We'll go back to having 10,000 or so tribal and city-state regions so that they can fight one another endlessly over small tracts of land. It would be endless warfare rippling out across the world. It would also completely destabilize everything about your way of life. Most of the people talking about this situation, they live decadent existences. Even if they're in the lower classes of the West, they've got food, you got a roof over your heads, even if it's shitty and leaks. You probably have a car, or at least a bike or something. You're not going to get any of this shit. You need to at least maintain decent global trade. I'm sorry, but the only thing that keeps that moving is the U.S. Navy. You do realize that, correct? There's a reason to support the Western Hemisphere in general, because the current Western order is why you have so much shit that is available to you. Much of that shit you don't need. All the Chinese imports, basically. All the cheap plastic crap. Cut out the materialism. Globalism will begin to vanish. Focus on the things that matter. But it is nice to go to the grocery store and have a choice of more than one kind of bread now, isn't it? Oh, wow, there's this option that, yeah, maybe there's too many kinds of bread. We can have a debate over that, but certainly it's better than having none. You know, the wheat crop was bad, and all the neighboring city-states have blockaded trade lines and stuff. We can't get any wheat, so, well, I'm sorry. No bread this year. The apple crop came in really well. You're nuts. You don't need globalism or the Great Reset, the World Economic Forum bullshit in order to have a system in which people are capable of trading and traveling, in which people are preferably not at war with one another. And there's the thing. I see a lot of hypocrites that are, U.S. adventurism in Syria, bad. U.S. invaded Afghanistan, bad. U.S. building a base in a friendly or neutral country somehow is also bad and an act of war. But Russia rolling in with a huge military force and crippling entire cities and shit, that's okay. Well, no, it's not. It's still war. You can justify it all you want. People are still dying, correct? Many of them civilians, correct? Soldiers are shooting at each other, correct? And people are fleeing by the millions, correct? How is that any different? It's the same fucking shit. The only difference is that the Russians, they have less sophisticated targeting systems and kill more civilians, maybe. That's basically the only difference, and I fail to see how it's a good one. That's about all. Peace out.